A middle-class family today earns more dollars than a middle-class family did 40 years ago. More dollars, and yet they feel poorer, they save less, and a smaller share of them own a home. That's not a feeling. The data agrees with them. So how can people earn more and be worse off? It sounds impossible. It isn't. It's arithmetic, a specific, quiet kind of math that almost nobody lays out in one place. I'm going to show you exactly where the middle class's money went. Not who to blame, the actual mechanics. Three forces working together that turned rising paychecks into shrinking wealth. And by the end, you'll understand something more useful than outrage. How to make sure the same math doesn't quietly happen to you. Because the forces that shrank the middle class are still running right now, and there are specific ways to stand outside them. I'm Mr. Finance. No outrage, no blame games, just the actual math behind the money stories everyone argues about. If that's your kind of thing, subscribing takes one tap. Now, force one. Here's the first thing the headline numbers hide. When people say inflation has been moderate over the decades, they're averaging everything together. And that average lies, because prices didn't all move together. The things that are nice to have, televisions, clothing, electronics, toys, actually got cheaper or barely moved. A TV that cost a fortune in 1985 is now cheap and enormous. That's the part of life that feels abundant. But the things you cannot opt out of, housing, healthcare, and education, rose far faster than paychecks did. These aren't luxuries. They're the exact things a middle-class life is built on: a home, staying healthy, and giving your kids a shot. And those three, the non-negotiables, are precisely where costs exploded. This creates a strange, specific feeling. You can afford the gadgets so you don't feel poor in the store, but you can't comfortably afford the house, the medical bills, or the tuition, the things that actually define security. So people feel simultaneously surrounded by cheap abundance and locked out of real stability. That contradiction is the lived experience of the modern middle class, and it comes straight from the fact that the average inflation number hides which prices moved. Cheap entertainment, expensive existence. That's force one. The stuff that matters most for building a stable life is exactly the stuff that outran the paycheck. The second force is the quietest, and it punishes exactly the responsible behavior the middle class was told to practice: saving cash. For generations, the advice was simple: work hard, save your money, be careful. But here's the hidden math. If your money sits in cash or a near-zero savings account while prices rise a few percent a year, your money is losing value every single year, even though the number in the account never drops. You're not being reckless. You're standing still while the ground moves under you. Think about what a dollar bought decades ago versus today. The dollar didn't change. What it buys collapsed. A saver who kept everything in cash for 40 years didn't stay even. They quietly lost more than half their purchasing power to inflation while doing everything they were told was responsible. Now here's the part that connects to the wealth gap. Inflation doesn't hurt everyone equally. If you own assets, a house, stocks, a business, those things tend to rise with inflation, or faster. If you only hold cash and your paycheck, you get eroded. So the same inflation that quietly drains the cautious saver quietly inflates the wealth of the asset owner. That's the engine of the widening gap. It's not that the wealthy are working harder. It's that they hold the things that go up when money loses value, while the middle class was taught to hold the one thing that goes down: cash. The honest takeaway isn't despair. It's that the rules rewarded owning assets, and most people were never clearly told to play by them. The third force is the one that turned a squeeze into a trap. When wages stopped keeping up with the cost of housing, healthcare, and education, people didn't lower their standard of living overnight. They filled the gap with something that felt like a solution and was actually a slow drain: debt. Credit cards, car loans, stretched to 7 years, buy now, pay later on everyday purchases, student loans, home equity borrowing. Each one let a family maintain a lifestyle their income no longer fully supported. And in the short term, it works. The gap gets bridged, life continues. But debt is a bridge you pay a toll to cross, and over and over. Interest quietly transfers money from the borrower to the lender every month, forever, until it's paid off. So the middle class ended up funding the gap between their wages and their costs by paying interest to those who already had capital. Money flowed from the squeezed to the wealthy, disguised as a monthly minimum payment. Here's the compounding trap. High-interest debt doesn't just cost you today, it steals your ability to build wealth tomorrow. Every dollar going to credit card interest at 20+% is a dollar that can't be invested at 8%. So the debt doesn't just cost the interest, it costs all the growth that money would have earned if it had been yours to invest. The gap between wages and costs didn't just get bridged by debt, it got permanent because the debt itself ate the money that could have closed it. That's the third force. Debt let the middle class keep up appearances while quietly handing away the exact resource, investable money, that could have moved them onto the winning side of forces 1 and 2. If you want to see all three forces collide in a single object, look at the house, because the home is exactly where the middle class story was won and lost, and it deserves its own minute. For most of the last century, the family home was the middle class's great wealth builder. You bought it with a mortgage, you paid it down over 30 years, and along the way, it quietly rose in value while inflation ate everyone else's cash. It was Force 2 working for you, an asset that climbed while the dollar shrank, combined with Force 3 working for you, because a fixed mortgage is one of the few kinds of debt that actually builds ownership instead of draining it. A homeowner rode inflation up, a renter watched it pass by. But here's the trap that snapped shut in recent decades. Force 1, costs outrunning wages, hit housing hardest of all. Home prices climbed so much faster than paychecks that the very asset that built middle-class wealth became the thing locking the next generation out of it. The ladder that lifted one generation was pulled up behind them, priced beyond reach for the people who came next. So the house tells the whole story in miniature. For those who got on the ladder early, it was the single best wealth machine an ordinary person ever had, inflation and leverage working in their favor for 30 years. For those locked out, rising rents drain them monthly while they build nothing, and the down payment they'd need keeps floating further away. The gap between owning and renting isn't just a lifestyle choice anymore. It's one of the sharpest dividing lines between the middle class that's still building wealth and the middle class that's quietly falling behind. Same three forces, one object, two completely different futures, depending on which side of the front door you're standing on. Put the three together, and the paradox dissolves. The essentials that define a stable life rose faster than paychecks, so earning more dollars didn't buy more security. Meanwhile, the cautious middle-class habit of holding cash quietly lost value to inflation, while asset owners got richer from the very same inflation. And to bridge the gap, families took on debt, which handed away the investable money that was their one path onto the winning side. Three forces, one direction. More income, less wealth. It was never a contradiction. It was arithmetic that simply doesn't show up on a paycheck. Nobody sends you a statement that says, you lost $11,000 of purchasing power this year and paid $3,000 in interest to stand still. The losses are invisible, spread across 1,000 ordinary transactions. That's exactly why almost nobody shows you this math. And here's the honest, important part. None of this means the middle class is doomed or that individuals are helpless. It means the default path, earn, hold cash, borrow to bridge the gap, is a losing path by design. The people who escaped didn't earn dramatically more. They just stopped playing the losing version of the game. So how do you make sure this math doesn't quietly happen to you? You reverse each of the three forces, one at a time. Against Force 1, essentials outrunning wages, the move is to keep the gap between what you earn and what you spend as wide as you honestly can, and to be especially careful with the big three: how much house, how much car, how much borrowed for school. These aren't small decisions that inflation erodes slowly. They're the enormous ones that set the whole trajectory. Right-size the non-negotiables, and the squeeze loosens. Against Force 2, cash quietly eroding, the move is to become an owner, not just a saver. Keep an emergency fund in cash, yes, but money you don't need for years should be in assets that rise with inflation instead of melting under it. Broadly, low-cost index funds that let an ordinary person own a slice of the whole economy. That single shift moves you from the eroding side of inflation to the benefiting side. It is the most powerful lever an ordinary person has. And against force 3, debt eating the growth, the move is to treat high-interest debt as the emergency it is. Paying off a 20% credit card is a guaranteed 20% return. There is no investment that reliably beats it. Kill the toll-taking debt first, and you reclaim the exact investable money that puts you on the winning side of the other two forces. None of these require a high income. They require refusing the default. The middle class didn't shrink because its people were weak. It shrank because the ordinary, sensible-sounding path quietly pointed downhill. Point yourself uphill instead, and the same forces that drained everyone else start slowly to work for you. And notice the pattern connecting all three moves. Each one turns a force from an enemy into an ally. Right-sizing the big costs widens the gap that inflation used to swallow. Owning assets flips inflation from something that erodes you into something that lifts you. Killing high-interest debt stops the leak and hands you back the exact fuel, investable dollars, that the whole escape runs on. You don't need 3 separate miracles. You need one decision, repeated. Stop holding what shrinks, start owning what grows, and refuse to pay tolls on the way. Do that consistently, and in 10 or 20 years, you're standing on the side of the math that used to be working against you. So why is the middle class getting poorer despite earning more? Because the essentials outran wages, because cash savings quietly eroded while asset owners gained, and because debt bridged the gap and ate the growth that could have closed it. 3 invisible forces, all pointing the same way.